"You're too old for this!" the black woman cried out, her voice cracking as dust swirled around her elegant boots, while the weathered rancher stood silent, his gray beard catching the merciless desert sun. The townspeople of Dusty Creek gathered like vultures, their cruel laughter echoing off wooden storefronts as they watched the mismatched pair. She, clearly educated and desperate; he, ancient and deceptive. Whispers already carried bets on which stagecoach east would carry her home within the week. But the old rancher possessed secrets buried deeper than his wrinkled hands suggested, and the charming young cowboy circling them both harbored ambitions that stretched far beyond stolen hearts. Hidden beneath their feet lay fortunes that could destroy or save an entire community, while forged papers and mysterious accidents began painting a picture of systematic theft. Would the woman's hidden knowledge prove their salvation, or would youth and deception triumph over wisdom and truth? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt in a cloud of red dust. Evelyn Carter stepped down onto the wooden platform, her dark blue traveling dress already collecting the desert grime that seemed to coat everything in Dusty Creek. She clutched a worn letter in her gloved hand, the paper soft from countless readings during her journey west. The letter promised a young, prosperous rancher named Jedediah Boone, a man of 28 with broad shoulders and a thriving cattle operation. Evelyn had written back with her photograph and agreed to marriage, burning her bridges in Philadelphia behind her. Now she searched the small crowd for a face that matched her expectations. A weathered man approached, his gray hair visible beneath a worn hat. Deep lines marked his face like canyons carved by desert wind. His shoulders were broad, yes, but his hands showed the calluses and scars of decades, not years. He removed his hat. His voice carried the weight of too many lonely seasons. "Miss Carter, I'm Jedediah Boone." The letter crumpled slightly in her grip. This man was easily 60, not 28. Her heart sank like a stone dropped in deep water. Around them, townspeople began to gather, drawn by the spectacle of another mail-order bride meeting her fate. A woman in a faded calico dress nudged her companion, their whispers carried on the dry air. "Look at that fancy lady. Bet she runs back east on the next stage." Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Evelyn's cheeks burned. She had spent her last $50 on the journey here. Her father's gambling debts had destroyed any hope of a respectable life back east. A minor scandal involving a married man had sealed her exile. There would be no returning home. Jedediah's weathered face showed shame. "I know I ain't what you expected, miss. I stretched the truth in my letters. Feared you wouldn't come otherwise." "You lied about your age." Her voice carried across the platform, drawing more attention. "Yes, ma'am, I did." The crowd's amusement grew. Someone called out from the gathering, "She gonna stay with old Jed or catch the evening stage?" A young cowboy pushed through the onlookers. Blonde hair caught the afternoon sun, and his smile showed perfect white teeth. He tipped his hat with practiced charm. "Ma'am, name's Sammy Larson. Couldn't help but notice you might be in need of assistance." Sammy's eyes lingered on her face, then dropped to assess her figure with barely concealed interest. His attention felt different from Jedediah's respectful distance. Hungrier. "This here's a misunderstanding that could be easily resolved," Sammy continued. "A lady of your obvious refinement deserves better than false promises." Jedediah stepped closer to Evelyn, not touching but creating a barrier between her and Sammy's advance. Miss Carter agreed to give this arrangement a chance. That decision's hers to make. "Course it is." Sammy's smile never wavered. "Just want her to know she has options. Young woman like herself shouldn't settle for desperation." The words hit like physical blows. Evelyn straightened her spine, drawing on lessons learned in her father's parlor when creditors came calling. She would not crumble in front of these strangers. "Mr. Boone, I believe we have matters to discuss privately." Jedediah nodded and moved to collect her trunk from the stage. Despite his age, he lifted the heavy case with surprising strength. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment concluded for now. As they walked toward a modest wagon, Sammy fell into step beside them. Miss Carter, my offer stands if you change your mind. Woman like you deserves a man who can provide properly. His eyes swept over Jedediah's worn clothes and weathered wagon. The comparison was clear without words. They rode in silence toward Jedediah's ranch, the town's judgmental stares fading behind them. The landscape stretched endlessly, dotted with scrub brush and distant mesas. Evelyn studied her companion's profile, searching for signs of the character that had shone through his letters, beneath the lies about age. The ranch house appeared modest, built from adobe and weathered wood. A few head of cattle grazed in nearby pastures, but nothing suggested prosperity. Evelyn's heart sank further. Inside, the house showed a woman's touch in faded curtains and carefully arranged furniture, but dust suggested neglect since the previous occupant's departure. Jedediah set her trunk in the small parlor. My wife passed 2 years ago. Been trying to manage a loan since. He gestured toward a daguerreotype on the mantel showing a kind-faced woman. Sarah would have known how to make you welcome proper. Evelyn sank into a worn chair, the weight of her situation settling like desert heat. She was trapped between a lie and the unknown. Her father had taught her to assess situations coldly, to find the advantages hidden in apparent disasters. But here, surrounded by evidence of Jedediah's deception, she felt only the crushing weight of her circumstances. "You're too old for this," she said finally, the words escaping before she could stop them. Marriage, ranching, deceiving young women into crossing the country for false promises. Jedediah absorbed the blow without flinching. "Yes, ma'am, you're likely right, but I'm asking for 1 month to prove I can provide what you need, even if I can't provide what you wanted." Outside, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Sammy Larson could be seen dismounting near their fence line, his attention focused on their property with an intensity that seemed far beyond casual neighborly concern. 3 days into her month of judgment, Evelyn began sorting through Sarah Boone's belongings. Jedediah had avoided the task for 2 years, unable to face the memories contained in his late wife's trunk. Evelyn approached it with the practical efficiency her father had taught her when assessing value in desperate times. Beneath layers of carefully folded dresses and personal letters, her fingers found something unexpected. A leather portfolio contained surveyor maps, geological charts, and small cloth bags filled with rock samples. The papers bore official territorial stamps and detailed mineral assessments of the surrounding area. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Her father had pored over similar documents during his mining ventures, teaching her to read the symbols and notations that revealed a land's hidden wealth. These surveys showed something remarkable. She spread the maps across the kitchen table, comparing property boundaries with mineral deposits marked in careful ink. The samples in the cloth bags confirmed what the charts suggested: silver, not traces or possibilities, but substantial deposits running beneath multiple properties in the area. The Boone Ranch sat directly above the richest vein. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, explaining how to identify silver ore by its weight, color, and crystalline structure. These samples showed exceptional purity, the kind of discovery that built fortunes and transformed territories. Sarah Boone had known. The surveys were commissioned under her name, dated just months before her death. She had been investigating strange rock formations found while digging a new well. The woman had died before revealing her discovery to anyone, including her husband. Evelyn carefully returned everything to the trunk, her mind racing with calculations. Conservative estimates put the silver's value at hundreds of thousands of dollars, enough to transform not just their lives, but the entire community's future. Outside, she found Jedediah repairing fence posts damaged during the night. The work had become routine since her arrival. Each morning brought new evidence of tampering: cut wire, scattered cattle, tools missing from their proper places. "Strange how these accidents keep happening," she said, testing his response. Jedediah hammered a new post into hard ground. "Been thinking the same. Never had troubles like this before." He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. Started right around the time Sammy began making offers on the land. The connection was becoming clear. Someone wanted this property badly enough to create problems that would encourage a sale. But did they know about the silver? Or were they operating on speculation? Evelyn walked the property lines that afternoon, using Sarah's maps to identify key locations. The geological formations matched perfectly with the survey markers. She collected her own samples, confirming the earlier findings. The silver extended beyond the Boone property, stretching across several neighboring ranches. That evening, Sammy appeared at their door with practiced timing. His smile carried the same calculated charm, but his eyes moved constantly, assessing and cataloging details about their home and land. "Thought I'd check on how you folks are settling in. Heard you had more trouble with the livestock." Jedediah invited him inside with the hospitality expected of isolated neighbors. Sammy's attention fixed immediately on the geological samples Evelyn had left drying on the windowsill. His expression remained neutral, but she caught the flash of recognition in his eyes. "Interesting rocks you've collected, Miss Carter. Hobby of yours?" "My father taught me about minerals. These formations are unusual for this region." Sammy picked up one of the larger samples, turning it in his hands with familiarity that confirmed her suspicions. This man knew exactly what he was examining. "Your father was a prospector then?" "Among other things." The conversation continued with careful politeness, but Evelyn sensed the shift in dynamics. Sammy now viewed her as a potential threat, rather than simply a woman to be charmed or rescued. His questions became more pointed, probing her knowledge and intentions. After he left, Jedediah sat heavily in his chair. "That man's interest in our property goes deeper than neighborly concern. How many other ranchers has he made offers to?" "Most folks in the area. The Morrison place sold to him last month after their well got poisoned somehow. The Hendersons are considering his offer after losing half their herd to mysterious illness." A pattern was emerging. Properties with potential mineral wealth were being systematically targeted. The tactics varied, but the results remained consistent. Desperate owners selling at reduced prices to escape their mounting troubles. Evelyn faced a crucial decision. Revealing the silver discovery to Jedediah would change everything. He was an honest man who would want to share the wealth fairly with their neighbors. But that honesty might also expose them to greater danger from whoever was orchestrating the land grab. She could use the knowledge to secure her own future, perhaps negotiating with Sammy or his associates independently. The silver represented freedom from the desperate circumstances that had driven her west. Or she could trust the weathered rancher who had shown her more genuine respect in 3 days than she had received in months back east. Jedediah's quiet integrity was proving more valuable than his false promises of youth and prosperity. That night, she lay awake listening to sounds outside their windows. Footsteps in the darkness suggested they were being watched. The stakes were rising beyond simple property disputes. Someone was willing to commit systematic fraud and intimidation to acquire these lands. If they discovered the true value of the mineral deposits, the threats would escalate beyond damaged fences and scattered cattle. Evelyn clutched Sarah's survey maps against her chest. The dead woman's secret had become her burden. The decision she made would determine not just her own fate, but the future of everyone in Dusty Creek who stood in the way of organized greed. Evelyn made her decision at dawn. She found Jedediah in the barn, tending to a mare with a suspicious limp. Another overnight incident. The pattern was accelerating. "We need to talk about something important." She spread Sarah's maps across a hay bale, watching his weathered face as understanding dawned. The geological surveys, the mineral samples, the true value hidden beneath their struggling ranch. Jedediah studied the documents with the careful attention of a man who had learned not to trust easy promises. "Sarah knew about this?" "She commissioned the surveys before she died." "Never had the chance to tell you?" Jedediah's calloused fingers traced the property lines marked on the maps. His expression showed wonder mixed with something deeper. The weight of responsibility that came with dangerous knowledge. "This explains Sammy's interest. Question is, how much does he know?" Evelyn had spent sleepless hours considering that puzzle. enough to target specific properties, not enough to stop searching. They developed their strategy over morning coffee. Jedediah would continue his normal routines while Evelyn investigated the scope of the conspiracy. Her education and analytical skills made her the natural choice for detective work. The courthouse in town held records of all property transfers. Evelyn spent hours reviewing sales documents, mapping patterns of ownership changes. Her father's business dealings had taught her to spot irregularities in legal paperwork. The pattern emerged clearly. 12 properties had changed hands in the past 18 months. All sales occurred after the owners faced serious troubles. All buyers traced back to shell companies connected to Eastern mining interests. But something else caught her attention. Discrepancies in the official records, signatures that didn't match, dates that conflicted with witness statements. The fraud went deeper than simple intimidation tactics. Doc Hollis found her in the courthouse as afternoon shadows lengthened. The town physician carried himself with the weary authority of someone who had witnessed too much human folly. Mighty interested in property records for someone planning to leave on the next stage. Evelyn looked up from the deed books. What makes you think I'm leaving? Most folks do when they discover Jed's not the young buck he claimed to be. Doc Hollis settled into the chair across from her. Of course, most folks don't spend days studying land transfers either. She closed the record book carefully. What can you tell me about the recent property sales? More than I should. Less than I'd like. Doc Hollis glanced around the empty courthouse. Morrison didn't want to sell. Neither did Henderson or the widow Bailey. Strange how troubles found them right when they were most vulnerable. Strange coincidences. Don't believe in coincidences when money's involved. Seen too much of human nature for that comfort. Doc Hollis leaned forward, his voice dropping. Young Sammy's got backing from somewhere. More money than any cowboy should have. Ask too many questions, though, and folks start having accidents. The warning was clear. Evelyn thanked him and returned to the ranch with her head full of dangerous knowledge. The conspiracy reached beyond simple land fraud into systematic theft backed by organized money. Jedediah was waiting with news of his own. More neighboring ranchers were facing troubles. The Patterson place lost their entire water supply when their well was mysteriously fouled. The Johnson family found their grain stores contaminated with something that made their livestock sick. They're escalating the pressure, forcing faster decisions. Evelyn shared her courthouse discoveries. The forged documents, the shell companies, the pattern of fraud that stretched across the territory. They were facing an organized criminal enterprise, not just local troublemakers. Question becomes what we do with what we know. That evening brought Sammy to their door again. This time he wasn't alone. 2 men waited by the gate, their presence more intimidating than neighborly. Sammy's usual charm had sharpened into something more direct. Heard you've been spending time at the courthouse, Miss Carter. Researching local history? I find land records fascinating. So much can be learned about a community's development. Sammy's smile didn't reach his eyes. Development's exactly what this area needs. Progress requires change. Some folks resist change to their detriment. The threat was polite but unmistakable. Jedediah stepped closer to Evelyn, his hand resting near the rifle propped by the door. Years of frontier living had taught him to recognize danger in civilized clothing. We're quite satisfied with things as they are. Satisfaction's a luxury not everyone can afford. Sammy's gaze swept their modest property. Heard you had more troubles with your livestock. These incidents tend to multiply until someone takes decisive action. After they left, Evelyn and Jedediah sat in tense silence. The game was entering a more dangerous phase. Their investigation had been noticed, and the response would likely escalate beyond property damage. They know we're onto something. Jedediah checked the rifle's ammunition with practiced efficiency. Question is whether we run or fight. Evelyn thought of her father, crushed by men who used money and intimidation to steal honest people's hopes. She thought of Sarah Boone, dead before she could protect her discovery. She thought of the neighbors facing ruin because they stood in the way of organized greed. We fight, but we fight smart. Outside, shadows moved near their fence line. The watchers were no longer bothering with subtlety. The confrontation was coming whether they chose it or not. The break-in attempt came on a moonless night. Evelyn heard the soft scraping of tools against their back door lock. She shook Jedediah awake without making sound. Years of frontier survival had taught him to wake alert and ready. They moved through their darkened house like ghosts, positioning themselves to observe the intruders. Two men worked methodically, searching for something specific. Their movements suggested familiarity with breaking and entering. This was professional work. One man headed straight for Sarah's trunk. The other began examining Evelyn's geological samples with practiced efficiency. They knew exactly what they were seeking. Jedediah appeared in the doorway with his rifle. The intruders fled without confrontation, but their message was clear. Privacy and safety were luxuries the conspiracy would no longer permit. Dawn brought more disturbing news. Doc Hollis arrived with information that changed everything. 3 more ranchers had received final offers from Sammy's associates. The terms were generous but non-negotiable. Accept immediately or face escalating consequences. Mrs. Patterson came to me last night. Said her deed's gone missing from her strongbox. Can't prove ownership without proper papers. Evelyn's blood chilled. Stolen deeds meant the fraud went beyond forged documents to outright theft. Families could lose their homes and livelihoods without legal recourse. How many others are missing their papers? Half the folks who've been targeted. Strange how documents disappear right when they're needed most. Doc Hollis shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His next words came reluctantly. There's something else. Been seeing patients with unusual symptoms. Livestock poisoning that don't match any natural causes. Someone's using chemistry to create their accidents. The systematic nature of the conspiracy was becoming clear. This wasn't opportunistic fraud, but organized crime backed by substantial resources and technical knowledge. Evelyn spent the morning reviewing every document in their possession. Sarah's surveys, property deeds, correspondence with territorial officials. She was searching for something that might serve as leverage or protection. Hidden in Sarah's personal letters, she found the breakthrough. Correspondence with a territorial mining inspector revealed that Sarah had been preparing to file official mineral claims. The letters referenced specific legal procedures and government contacts. More importantly, Sarah had shared her discovery with the Territorial Mining Office. Official records existed beyond their property. The conspiracy couldn't suppress or steal government documentation. But the letters revealed something more disturbing. Sarah had expressed concerns about being watched and followed. Her final letter mentioned strange accidents affecting other properties in the area. She had recognized the pattern months before her death. The timing of Sarah's death suddenly seemed less coincidental. Evelyn shared her discoveries with Jedediah over a tense lunch. His weathered face showed the controlled anger of a man who had spent years as a deputy marshal. Justice and law enforcement were concepts he understood deeply. Sarah was investigating the same pattern we're seeing now. Someone wanted her stopped. The implications were chilling. If Sarah had been murdered to prevent exposure of the fraud, Evelyn and Jedediah faced similar danger. Their investigation was following the same path that had cost Sarah her life. That afternoon brought the most frightening development yet. Sammy arrived with official-looking papers and a smug expression that suggested triumph. Brought some documents that might interest you folks. Seems there's been some confusion about property boundaries. The papers showed survey results that contradicted Sarah's maps. According to these documents, the silver deposits lay entirely on adjacent property now owned by Sammy's mining company. The Boone Ranch contained no mineral wealth whatsoever. Evelyn examined the surveys with her trained eye. The forgery was sophisticated but not perfect. Elevation markers didn't match topographical reality. Reference points had been shifted to create false boundaries. Someone with significant resources had manufactured convincing but fraudulent documentation. These surveys are dated after Sarah's death. Sammy's smile never wavered. Sometimes earlier surveys contain errors that later work corrects. Progress requires accurate information. Jedediah studied the papers with growing anger. You're claiming our land contains nothing of value while the valuable deposits conveniently sit on property you just purchased. Convenient for me, unfortunate for you. Of course, my original offer still stands if you're interested in selling. After Sammy left, they faced their most serious crisis yet. The fraudulent surveys could be used in legal proceedings to steal their mineral rights even if they retained their property. The conspiracy had evolved to direct theft backed by convincing documentation. Evelyn realized they needed help beyond their own resources. Fighting organized crime required organized response. Jedediah's law enforcement contacts might provide the backing they needed. Time to contact your marshal friends. Jedediah nodded grimly. Should have done it sooner. This thing's bigger than local troubles. That evening, they carefully documented everything they had discovered. The forged deeds, stolen documents, systematic intimidation, and fraudulent surveys. Evidence of a criminal conspiracy that stretched across multiple counties. As they worked, shadows moved again outside their windows. The watchers were maintaining constant surveillance now. Any attempt to leave their property or contact authorities would be observed and potentially prevented. The conspiracy was closing its grip around them. Time was running out for escape or outside help. But Evelyn had one more card to play. Sarah's correspondence included the name and address of the territorial mining inspector, a government official who knew about the legitimate mineral claims and would recognize the fraudulent surveys for what they were. Getting that information to the right authorities would require careful planning and considerable risk. But it might be their only chance to expose the truth before becoming another pair of unfortunate accidents in Dusty Creek's recent history. The battle lines were drawn. Tomorrow would bring either justice or disaster. The trap began with Evelyn's performance of a lifetime. She appeared at Sammy's makeshift office in town, her demeanor suggesting defeat and desperation. Her clothes were deliberately disheveled, her eyes red from manufactured tears. "I need to speak with you privately, about Jedediah and the property." Sammy's satisfaction was immediate and obvious. He had been waiting for this moment since her arrival in Dusty Creek, the sophisticated Eastern woman finally recognizing reality. "Of course, Miss Carter. Please, sit down." His office was a converted storefront filled with maps, legal documents, and surveying equipment. Evidence of the systematic land acquisition surrounded them. Sammy made no effort to hide the scope of his operation. "I assume you've reached some conclusions about your situation." Evelyn let trembling creep into her voice. "Jedediah can't protect me from what's coming. These accidents, the pressure on our neighbors. I understand the message." Sammy leaned back in his chair, triumph lighting his features. "Practical thinking. Smart women recognize when circumstances require adaptation. I have information that might be valuable to your operation. Knowledge that could save everyone considerable trouble." His attention sharpened immediately. "What sort of information?" "Jedediah doesn't know, but I discovered something in his late wife's belongings. Survey reports, geological assessments. Sarah Boone was investigating mineral deposits before she died." Sammy tried to maintain his casual demeanor, but hunger flickered in his eyes. Mineral deposits can be tricky, often disappointing when properly investigated. These weren't disappointing. Silver deposits, substantial ones. The surveys show exactly where the richest veins run. She produced one of Sarah's authentic geological maps, allowing Sammy to examine it briefly before pulling it back. His reaction confirmed what she had suspected. He knew about the silver but lacked precise information about its location and extent. "Interesting. What exactly are you proposing?" "Safe passage out of this territory, enough money to start fresh somewhere else. In exchange, I'll provide complete survey information and ensure Jedediah never learns what his property actually contains." Sammy's smile became predatory. "And you believe you can convince an old rancher to sell his ancestral land?" "Jedediah trusts me. If I recommend accepting your offer, he'll listen, especially if the alternative involves my safety." The negotiation continued for an hour. Evelyn revealed carefully selected details about the mineral surveys while extracting information about Sammy's operation. Each exchange confirmed the scope of the conspiracy and his methods. The Patterson place was just the beginning. We've identified 12 properties sitting on significant deposits. Your husband's land contains the richest concentration. Evelyn's stomach churned, but she maintained her desperate facade. How did you identify the mineral locations without proper surveys? We have our methods. Sometimes previous owners conducted their own investigations. Sometimes we conduct them ourselves. Information has a way of becoming available when properly motivated. The admission was damning. Sammy was confessing to systematic theft of geological data, property fraud, and intimidation. But Evelyn needed more specific details for the evidence to be legally useful. The documents I've seen suggest ownership of these properties transferred quite smoothly. Impressive efficiency. Sammy's pride overcame his caution. Legal paperwork can be remarkably flexible when properly handled. Deeds get lost. Surveys get corrected. Officials become cooperative when presented with appropriate incentives. What about the owners who don't cooperate? Most people become reasonable when faced with sufficient pressure. Accidents have a way of clarifying priorities. Each word was being heard by hidden listeners. Doc Hollis crouched beneath the office's back window, documenting every confession. Jedediah waited in the building's rear alley with Territorial Marshal James Crawford, who had arrived that morning in response to their urgent messages. 2 defrauded ranchers, Morrison and Henderson, maintained watch at strategic positions around the building. The trap was comprehensive, designed to capture not just confessions, but evidence of the broader conspiracy. Sammy produced a leather portfolio containing forged deeds, altered surveys, and correspondence with corrupt territorial officials. His confidence led him to display the tools of his criminal enterprise like trophies. Your cooperation will make this transition much smoother than previous acquisitions. Some property owners required more aggressive persuasion. Such as Sarah Boone? The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Sammy's expression shifted, revealing something darker beneath his practiced charm. Sarah was unfortunate. Intelligent women sometimes discover things that complicate business arrangements. Her accident was regrettable but necessary. The admission of murder completed their evidence gathering. Marshal Crawford had heard enough to justify arrests and seizure of documents. The conspiracy would face federal charges spanning multiple territories, but Sammy's next words revealed the immediate danger they all faced. Of course, your cooperation assumes you'll be permitted to leave this territory alive. Information has value, but witnesses represent liability. His hand moved toward the desk drawer where a pistol waited. The pretense of negotiation was ending. Sammy had extracted what he wanted, and no longer needed to maintain civilized behavior. Evelyn realized the trap had become mutual. They had gathered evidence of the conspiracy, but Sammy had drawn them into a confined space where violence could solve his problems permanently. The sound of boots on wooden floors announced the arrival of Sammy's associates, men who had been lurking nearby, waiting for his signal. The office was becoming a killing ground. Marshal Crawford's whistle pierced the afternoon air. The signal for coordinated action. Justice was about to collide with organized crime in the dusty streets of Dusty Creek. Marshal Crawford's whistle brought immediate chaos to the dusty street. Sammy's hand froze halfway to his drawer as boots thundered across wooden sidewalks. His associates found themselves surrounded by armed ranchers and territorial law enforcement before they could draw their weapons. Jedediah appeared in the office doorway, his rifle trained on Sammy with the steady hands of a former deputy. "Keep those hands visible, son." Marshal Crawford entered behind him, his badge gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. 20 years of federal law enforcement had taught him to read guilty men. Sammy's expression showed everything he needed to know. "Samuel Larson, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and murder in the death of Sarah Boone." The portfolio of forged documents provided immediate evidence. Crawford examined the altered deeds and fraudulent surveys while Doc Hollis testified about the confessions he had witnessed. The conspiracy's paper trail stretched across 3 territories. Within hours, the scope of the criminal enterprise became clear. Sammy's office contained correspondence with corrupt officials, payment, records for intimidation services, and geological surveys stolen from murdered property owners. The mining company backing the operation had tentacles reaching into territorial government. 6 months later, Dusty Creek bustled with legitimate prosperity. The silver deposits had been developed through a community mining cooperative that ensured fair wages and shared profits. Former victims of the land fraud owned stakes in the operation that had tried to destroy them. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the newly constructed schoolhouse, watching her students practice their letters. Children who had faced poverty and uncertainty now attended classes funded by mining revenues. Their parents worked honest jobs with steady pay. The transformation extended beyond economics. Dusty Creek had become a model community where education and cooperation replaced exploitation and fear. News of their success attracted legitimate settlers and honest businesses. Jedediah approached on horseback, his sheriff's badge catching morning sunlight. The town council had unanimously elected him to maintain law and order. His experience as a deputy marshal, combined with his integrity, made him the natural choice. Morning inspection of the mining operations went well, productions exceeding all projections. The silver veins proved even richer than Sarah's surveys had indicated. Conservative estimates suggested decades of profitable extraction. The community's future was secured through honest development of their natural resources. Doc Hollis emerged from his expanded medical practice, wiping his hands on a clean towel. The town's prosperity had allowed him to purchase modern equipment and hire an assistant. Healthcare that had been basic survival was now comprehensive medicine. Young Mrs. Patterson delivered a healthy son this morning, makes 12 births since the mining started, populations growing faster than we can build houses. The baby boom reflected the community's confidence in their future. Families that had considered fleeing were now putting down deeper roots. Children would grow up in a town built on cooperation rather than exploitation. Marshal Crawford visited monthly to ensure federal oversight of the mining operation continued smoothly. The cooperative model had attracted attention from territorial officials as a solution to resource development conflicts. Washington's sending a delegation next month to study your community structure might become a model for territorial development. The recognition brought pride, but more importantly, it brought protection. Federal attention made future attempts at fraud or intimidation much more difficult. Dusty Creek was no longer isolated and vulnerable. Evelyn walked through the town's transformed Main Street. Buildings that had been shabby and neglected now showed fresh paint and careful maintenance. The general store stocked goods that reflected the community's increased purchasing power. Her own transformation was equally dramatic. The desperate woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 6 months ago had become the town's most respected educator and business administrator. Her intelligence and analytical skills were valued rather than dismissed. The mining cooperative's bookkeeping required sophisticated financial management. Evelyn's education, combined with practical knowledge learned from her father's business dealings, made her indispensable to the operation's success. Jedediah found her reviewing production reports in their comfortable home. The modest ranch house had been expanded and improved, but it remained a working property. They raised cattle alongside their community responsibilities. Territorial Mining Inspector confirms the silver reserves extend even further south. Looks like we'll be managing this operation for decades. Their marriage had evolved into genuine partnership, built on mutual respect and shared values. The age difference that had once seemed insurmountable was now irrelevant. Character and compatibility mattered more than superficial considerations. Evening brought the monthly community meeting where cooperative members discussed business matters and future planning. The schoolhouse served double duty as meeting hall, filled with families whose lives had been transformed by shared prosperity. Morrison presented the latest production figures. Henderson reported on new housing construction. The widow Bailey discussed plans for a community library. Former victims had become community leaders. Evelyn presented the financial reports that showed their success in concrete numbers, revenue allocation between individual payments, community improvements, and future investment reserves, mathematics that represented security and hope. The meeting concluded with discussion of expansion possibilities. The cooperative model was attracting interest from other communities facing similar challenges. Dusty Creek could become the center of a regional network based on fair resource development. Walking home under star-filled skies, Evelyn reflected on the journey from desperate mail-order bride to respected community leader. The transformation seemed impossible in retrospect, but it had happened through courage, intelligence, and cooperation. Jedediah's weathered hand found hers in the darkness. Been thinking about what you said that first day, about me being too old for this. She squeezed his fingers gently. I was wrong about many things that day. Turned out neither of us was too old for anything that mattered. Their footsteps echoed on wooden sidewalks built with mining cooperative funds. Around them, Dusty Creek slept peacefully, protected by honest law enforcement and sustained by fair prosperity. The future stretched ahead with promise rather than fear.